Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of What the Dementia by Bambu Care. I'm your host, Brianna Wilson. I'm a certified dementia practitioner and the founder of Bambu Care. For today's podcast episode, we are going to talk about activities for people living with dementia across the stages. So we're going to talk about some key things that you want to keep in mind for each stage of dementia and some activity ideas that go along with each stage. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about a company named Relish and how they may have something fitting for your person living with dementia. And just as a heads up, this episode is not sponsored by Relish. It's just a company that I'm aware of, that I've had contact with, and have had some experience with their products, okay? So I just wanted to share them all with you. We also have 24 activity ideas for both men and women on the free resources section of our website, letsbambu.com/resources. So feel free to download those if you are interested, okay? And then the second thing is that we have a free webinar coming up on Tuesday, March 28th at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time called Dementia Communication 101, Understanding Effective Communication Strategies. There will be a replay available, so even if you can't make it live, be sure to register, okay? The link to sign up will also be in the podcast notes. I really do hope that some of you will be able to join us. Next week, we will be doing our housekeeping episodes, so definitely stay tuned for some exciting updates, okay? Also, if you enjoy our podcast episodes, please be sure to give us a good rating to help other dementia care partners like yourself find our podcast. It would be super helpful and much appreciated. If you would like to keep up with us between podcast episodes, then consider following us on Instagram at Let's Bamboo or joining us in our free support community at letsbamboo.com/champions. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So just for some context, when we are talking about activities, we are talking about activities outside of self-care today, okay? Self-care can definitely be an activity. We call these basic activities of daily living, right? But today we're going to focus on activities outside of those basic ADLs. Now, I cannot stress enough how important it is for people living with dementia to not only stay engaged in life and have opportunities for social interaction, but to also practice their skills. Because with dementia, it really is a use it or lose it type of condition, okay? But activities in general is just so good for the overall well-being of a person. Studies have shown that engaging in meaningful activities can decrease what some may consider challenging behaviors, decrease depression, improve sleep, stimulate the brain, and improve relationships with care partners. That's pretty good, right? So, when we think of activities for our person living with dementia, what do we need to keep in mind? So, generally speaking, we want to take into consideration their likes, interest, and preferences. This could be both based on what they are into now and what they were into based on their past life experiences. Sometimes this looks the same, and sometimes this looks a little different. You want to take into consideration their attention span and take into consideration their current skills and abilities. So you need to know what they can't do, but it's even more important to consider what they can do. You don't want to come from a limited mindset of, oh, they probably can't do fill in the blank, because that's going to stunt your creativity and honestly give your partner the short end of the stick. So you want to think from oh, well, they're still able to tell colors apart. They can still read and write. They can stand for at least 10 minutes. Oh, okay, their hearing is still intact. They have a pretty good sense of smell still. They can follow 1 to 2 step directions. If I model a task, then they can follow what I've just done. Do you get what I'm saying? When you think like this, you'll naturally be able to come up with more ideas for activities, and in some cases, even force yourself, in a good way, to break activities down into smaller components to best meet your partner's needs. It's important to realize that activities don't have to be this full-blown thing. It can literally be one part of a typical activity, just one part. And the different parts of the activity can even be spread over a couple of days, especially if their attention span is short and they get tired easily. There's really no right or wrong way per se to go about this. You just may find that one way works better than another, okay? Now, in their own right, let's talk about what activities should be. So, top 5 things. 1, familiar. 2, individualized and adapted to the person's needs, interests, and abilities. 3, purposeful and meaningful. 4, failure free. And 5, judged by their enjoyment, not performance, okay? When it comes to activities, it honestly shouldn't matter if the person is doing it right. It's about whether or not they are enjoying themselves. So, if your partner is participating in an activity and they aren't really getting the hang of it and they're becoming frustrated, then yes, intervene, simplify, adapt, demonstrate support, right? But if they're doing their own thing, their own way, and it's not hurting them or anybody else, let them have at it if they're enjoying themselves, okay? So let's get into activities for the different stages and some important things to keep in mind. This will be broken up using the 3-stage model of early, middle, and late, okay? So let's start with the early stages of dementia. In the early stages of dementia, people can still usually follow 2 to 3-step directions. They can usually still read instructions, but they may need help following them accurately. They can learn new things with repeated practice, and they can still socialize pretty well, but they may need extra time to find the right words that they're trying to communicate. And they can usually walk pretty well, right? Their procedural memory is also intact, which is more of an unconscious type of memory regarding habit, skill, and task performance, okay? Now, the biggest thing to keep in mind with people in early stages is that judgment and safety awareness is usually an issue and decreased problem solving. And so that's why at least distant supervision becomes important. So, with this information, what could be 3 activity ideas? So, one could be participating in any housework type of activity. This could be like folding clothes, doing laundry, or a cooking activity like following a simplified recipe. Reminiscent activities, whether it's verbal or visual. So, verbal meaning maybe there's a card with a sentence on it asking them a question. Maybe you just verbally ask them the question, or there's a photo, and then you're using that photo to support the reminiscent activity, okay? And then card or board games, especially familiar card and board games. I've had a lot of patients teach me the card games that they grew up playing, and I tell you what, I don't even know if we were actually playing it properly, but we had a really good time, and that's what's important. But again, this is about what your person actually likes to do. So, for example, if I ever get dementia, please do not ask me to do a simple housework task to help you out because I will probably roll my eyes at you. I'm just being honest, okay? So, you want to make sure that these activities are tailored to your partner and what they enjoy, okay? So, let's move on to the middle stages. In the middle stages, people are really good with gross motor movements and using their hands to manipulate objects, as long as it doesn't require heavy fine motor skills. But some can still use their fine motor skills too, right? They can still usually read short, simple phrases or sentences and can follow 1-step directions. They can usually tell shapes and colors apart as far as their visual presentation, but they may not be able to say, oh, that's a circle, that one's blue, or if you say which one's the blue one, they might not be able to point to it, okay? But they can tell that these look different and these look the same, okay? Do you get what I mean? They can also usually still walk, but they may be more unsteady on their feet or require an adaptive device or just walk a whole lot slower. They are typically really good with tasks that require repetitive motion. So, a task where you're basically doing the same movement over and over, and their music memory and rhythm is still relatively intact. Some may not remember the exact words per se, but they may be able to mumble or hum the tune or catch a few words here or there, or even tap or dance to the beat. And it's pretty neat to witness how, when words are lost, the ability to sing still remains. And that's mainly because different parts of the brain are involved when it comes to language, which is on the left side of the brain, and music and rhythm, which is on the right. Now, the biggest thing to keep in mind with people in mid stage dementia is that their attention span typically drastically decreases, meaning that they will likely require more cues to participate or stay engaged. This could include requiring verbal, visual, or tactile cues, and honestly, some combination of all three. You may also notice that they may not always recognize an object or what to do with it. So, if that's the case, you'll have to orient them to it and show them how to use it, okay? Another thing to keep in mind is that you may start to notice more visual changes, and so they really only notice what they can see directly in front of them. Okay? We're talking about 12 to 14 inches in front of them, definitely within arm's length, okay? With somewhat of tunnel vision. So, very limited peripheral vision, okay? So, what are some activities that may be appropriate for someone in the middle stages? So, repetitive gross motor activities like kicking or tossing a ball or balloon batting, things like that, while sitting or supported if necessary, right? Wiping a table or rolling out dough, craft activities, especially ones that, again, take advantage of repetitive motions like painting or sanding. Sorting and matching activities are really good in middle stages, or even sing along type of activities. Now, let me just say this: people in middle stages can often still do the things that people in early stages can do, but it just looks a little different, and you have to adapt the task and play on their strengths, okay? Then, lastly, we have late stage dementia. So, at this point, the focus shifts to their senses, because for many people living with dementia, their senses are still very much alive and responsive. But the thing is, it may take their brain and body longer to process and then respond to said stimuli, which is why I think there is often this disconnect between the reality of a person's abilities in the later stages and what the onlooker, for lack of a better word, is experiencing. So, unless they have comorbidities like glaucoma or cataracts impacting their vision, or they're deaf, or refuse to use their hearing aids, they can usually still see. It just has to be directly in front of them for them to attend to, okay? And they can usually still hear quite a bit, probably more than you think. So, interaction and connection is going to require some patience on your part because you have to give them time to respond to the environment around them, okay? Now, in the late stages, you may notice that they may not be able to say too many words, if any at all. Their balance and stability may not be too great, so they may be heavily reliant on adaptive equipment if they can still walk, or they may require support to sit upright or even hold their head up, or they may be completely bed bound. So, what can we do activity wise with this information? This is where we have to tap into the senses, and it's definitely going to be more experiential, meaning there's no definitive beginning or end to the activity. So let's name an activity for each. So with vision, the first thing that comes to mind is fish, bird, or squirrel watching. If you can get them positioned by a window, they make wonderful window bird feeders that suction onto the window, or you can just put one near the window outside. And bird feeders are really great because they typically attract both squirrels and birds, but they do make squirrel feeders as well. Then we have smell. So this could be like lighting a candle that smells really good, one that has a lot of throw, I think that's what it's called, or using wax melts if you don't like the idea of a flame, or even essential oils could be a good option. But please, when it comes to essential oils, do not get carried away. There are instructions for safe use, and some people can be particularly sensitive to essential oils. So just be mindful, okay? Taste could be like food or drinks with a strong herbal or spice taste. And of course, it's important to always keep in mind that swallowing does become more affected in these later stages. So make sure that they are a safe consistency and texture. And you always want to consult a speech therapist if your person has any swallowing difficulties, okay? For touch, we can think about safe, wanted touch, like massages, hand holding, gentle brushing or combing of the hair. Now, if your person's tender-headed, though, maybe not a good activity, right? But we can also think about things like therapeutic dolls or pets for them to hold or pet, and like fidget blankets or toys, okay? And then what's left? Hearing. So, music is always a good choice. Soft, gentle music. Sometimes instrumental type of music can be better than words at this stage. Sounds from nature, wind chimes, white noise or brown noise, things like that. If a person used to enjoy heavy metal music, right, it may not be a crowd pleaser later in life. It could be far too overstimulating. So, even though we do want to keep their preferences and past history in mind, we still need to consider, is it appropriate now, okay? If they still have some gross motor abilities, they may even be able to play an instrument like shaking a maraca to music, tapping their hand on a drum, or even hitting a tambourine, things like that, okay? So, again, I just want to emphasize that all of this should be individualized and based on your partner's interest and abilities. People are unique, and stages are definitely a good way to see how things typically progress, but they are not concrete, nor should they be treated as such. Now, I personally like the stages because it gives you a general idea of what you should be aware of, things to take into consideration, and it also helps you just better prepare when you realize that dementia is terminal and progressive. But ultimately, you have to focus on your partner's abilities, no matter what stage they're at, okay? You have to focus on what they can do and what they like. You can plan the best activity in the world, but if it doesn't align with their interest and if it's not graded to their abilities, well, you're going to have to try again and adapt. And heck, even if you do take these things into consideration, you may still have to go back to the drawing board or try again later because sometimes people just don't want to do anything. I'm talking beyond lack of motivation, beyond apathy, beyond difficulty initiating a task. I mean, can you think of a day where you could do something, but you just simply chose not to? It's a part of being a human, okay? Sometimes we just don't want to do anything, and that's okay. So, just real quick, at the beginning of this podcast episode, I mentioned a company named Relish, and I want to take a moment to introduce you to them in case you're not aware. Again, they're not a sponsor of this podcast episode, nor am I being paid to share this information, so I just want to throw that in there for transparency. But they are a company that I quite like, and back in 2022, they did send me over a couple of products to try out and share with my audience. So, Relish is a company that focuses on improving the overall well being of people with dementia by providing fun, meaningful activities that can help build their relationships with their family, friends, and caregivers. They have a great mission. All of their products are created for people living with dementia, and their products are pretty affordable too, which is always a plus, right? So let's just highlight one product for each stage so that you have an idea of what could be appropriate for your partner. So for the early stages, they have conversation games with like a job or hobby emphasis. And basically, the idea is to talk about the topic on the card, right? Share stories, share opinions, and have some friendly debate. It may even give you some ideas for other activities that you can do based on what that conversation leads to. An activity for middle stages that they have could be aqua paints. This is one of the activities that I had the privilege of trying, and it's pretty neat. They have different themes to choose from to match your partner's interest, and all you need is water and a paintbrush, and it provides an error-free and relatively mess-free way of painting. Another great thing is that it dries quickly and can be reused over and over again. And then for the late stages, a good activity could be their tactile turn or fidget widgets. These are good for people who are constantly moving their hands, like rubbing their hands together or picking at themselves, or pulling on their clothes or touching things nearby. And so the tactile turn or fidget widgets really just gives them something productive to do with their hands that may be engaging, okay? Now, I know we just ran through that quickly, but they really do have a lot of good options. You can sort through their website by stage or interest, which is pretty cool, and they even have an activity section on their website that can give you a lot of good ideas for activities that you can do at home. Some you'll have to get the supplies for, and others they have printables that you can download. So it's a great resource for activities. Check them out. Their website is relish-life.com. I'll put it in the podcast notes. They ship to the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. But no matter where you are in the world, you may benefit from their activities section. So be sure to still check them out, okay? So that's all I have for you for today's podcast episode. Hopefully you found it enjoyable and informative. If you do find our podcast helpful, please consider leaving us a review to help others find the podcast. If anyone has any questions, comments, or future podcast requests, remember you can always send us an email at podcast@whatthedementia.com. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of What the Dementia by Bambu Care. We look forward to catching you on the next episode. Take care, and until next time, stay strong, care on, and remember, you are not alone. Bambu Care is always here.